volunteer, see if anybody is willing to talk us through their intersection and thinking about exposure and likelihood and severity. If you're brave enough to volunteer, or you want a prize enough that you'll volunteer, just hit the raise hand button and we'll unmute you, and then we'll find your intersection. I'll dive in via Street View and we can have a bit of a chat about it. So somebody want to put their hand up? Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Gonna jump out of the gates with a couple of prizes, Michael. Now, Michael, you should be able to unmute yourself now and talk to us, hopefully. Maybe.
Yeah, bottom left. Thank you. Hey, everyone.
Hello. Now, Michael, remind me where your intersection was.
So I picked the intersection of Pialigo Avenue and Sutton Road, located in the east side of the ACT, in a suburb called Majura. So I gave a link in that report.
Yeah.
I think you're still controlling screen. So.
Yeah. Hang on. I'm just bringing it up. Hang on. So it was Sutton and
Pialigo.
Pialigo, and that. Okay. Where's Pialigo?
It kind of links between Queanbeyan and the Canberra airport.
Oh, yeah, okay.
One of the main arterials into the ACT.
Not the. Sorry.
And I've popped it into the chat.
Oh, thanks. Kathy saved me again. Was struggling for a second there. Thank you. Right. Share screen. Ah, yes. Sorry. Yes. Okay. Are you seeing the Street View, Kathy and
yep.
Michael? Yep. Good.
Yes.
All right. Let's go for a little drive up the road here. Okay. There we go. On some. Yeah. So, just having a quick tour around so people can sort of get their head around this a little bit. Right turn there. Oh yeah, okay. Okay. 80 km/h speed limit, isn't it?
Correct, on all approaches.
On all approaches. And what do we got here? Sign. There you go. Okay. So, Michael, now tell us let's go through this systematically as we did in that exercise. Let's start by talking about exposure and sort of number of vehicles.
Yeah, so priority controlled T-junction. The sight lines are actually okay. It's just a semi kind of rural location. And the commuter peaks are really quite heavy. The Pialigo Avenue leg in particular would be in the order of thousands of vehicles in the peak, and then the Sutton Road approach, the minor leg, being kind of in the order of 1,000 vehicles per hour trying to turn. Predominant movement is right towards Canberra. Yeah, it's a pretty gnarly intersection at the moment. Just judging that gap, right turn onto Pialigo Avenue is the main cause of driver error. So exposure is purely for me, it's the conflicting turn movements with this volume of traffic. So if we're going to talk exposure, traffic volumes, and to some extent a bit of the active travel cyclist commuter volume as well.
Okay, so that's good there. Like the exposure, linking it back to being this main arterial with lots of vehicles, and the number of vehicles is really driving our exposure. And as you said there, you've got some commuter cyclists and the like. That's adding to the exposure of those. In terms of the form of the intersection, we'll get to what that influences shortly. And the like. but yeah, really exposure. We've got to. It's what's influencing the number of vehicles, the number of pedestrians, number of cyclists, number of motorcyclists. So I would assume not many pedestrians.
Yeah, very rarely.
Yep. So low exposure for pedestrians. Probably, as you're saying, a little bit of exposure for cyclists, lots of exposure for passenger vehicle occupants, and probably motorcyclists.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So that's good. That's good. Right. Let's get on to now likelihood of crashes. What's influencing the likelihood of crashes? And you slightly alluded to a couple of them already.
The first one is the form of intersection. So being a priority controlled give way or T-junction. Obviously, we could go to a higher level of control around about a traffic signal. And for this type of environment, they're the logical options. You could go all out and say grade separated interchange, but good luck.
Yeah.
And then the second most important, I suppose, is the traffic speeds. So it is approaching the entrance into Queanbeyan. So if we do that hand left, shortly outside of this intersection, it reduces down to a 60k approach on approach to bridge over Molonglo River. So
Oh yeah, a bit further down.
it's not too far away. Yeah. Anyway, they're the two main factors for likelihood. I did also note in my report the conflicting movements, if you can reduce those, but I don't think that's a feasible treatment here.
Yep.
The whole back to exposure and likelihood, banning any selected movements. If we did that, the alternate route can add in the order of 40 kilometres to get into the ACT. So yeah, not an option.
Yep. Okay, but you're right there to say that taking sort of route planning and things, pushing that to the side for the moment. I mean, obviously, as you say, it wouldn't practically work, but if you were to block off some of the turns, you're right to say it would influence likelihood and maybe exposure a bit. When we get to the next phase of actually quantifying things in a safe system assessment, you'll see why I am a little reluctant to say it's an exposure change for that. Well, yes, if people aren't turning right, it's going to reduce exposure. There's still some exposure to crashes as intersection crashes, but we'll get into that, where that's sort of minute detail for us to work on in the next module, actually. But that's really good. That the intersection form is definitely likelihood. You mentioned there the speed, absolutely going to influence the likelihood. And there's a heap of factors that are probably lesser influence, but still influence the likelihood. And I like the way you said, those were the main factors in your opinion, and I absolutely agree with that. But everything, there's a heap of things in here that would influence likelihood of crashes, either making it more likely for crashes or less likely for crashes. And you can go things like the fact that there's lighting, line marking, we've got some surface condition irregularities, at least in this. It might have been fixed up. You're right, there was good sight distance, so that's interesting. We might have that sort of dynamic visual obstruction issue, although it doesn't look like we will because it sweeps around this way. But that's where, you have a large left turning vehicle blocking sight lines for the people deciding to come out or not. Interesting, like things like this short
lack of acceleration ramp of sorts.
Yeah,
it really behaves poorly, that leg. Yeah,
I bet it does. I mean, I really got a particular dislike for these where you half give them acceleration, but you're not giving them the full acceleration, because it just draws people into making bad judgments because they're going at a speed. If the stand-up angle of that entry point there was improved, and it was squarer, they'd be making a very sort of conscious, deliberate decision. Or because if they've got to about this point, they've decided to go, and it causes, challenges. So we want to see that full acceleration length, or really square it up. These sort of half measures certainly increase the likelihood of crashes. We'll talk about severity shortly. So then you can get into some really minute detail on likelihood. We did start to get into that with the line marking and pavement and delineation, warning sign, all of these sorts of things. And they're all sort of tweaking with the likelihood of crashes. But let's go to severity now. What did you have?
Yes, okay, so severity, 2 items listed in the report were, again, traffic speed and the crash impact angles.
Beautiful.
And I was kind of working on the assumption that a roundabout was a suitable treatment at this location. I think from our previous modules or lessons learned presentations, roundabout has fewer conflict points than signalized intersection and lower speeds of accident collision. So the preference there.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I think this is a no-brainer of a site for a roundabout. But let's go back to exposure factors, and you've hit the nail on the head there. Speed is going to be a huge influencer in severity, and the impact angle there, especially as you say for that right turner out, pretty much exactly a 90-degree angle, and at those speeds, this is going to be very, very severe. So some other more, I suppose, some other factors that would influence the severity of crashes could be the proportion of heavy vehicles. So obviously a larger mass vehicle having that collision is going to be more severe. Some of the other areas where crashes could occur, and actually, as much as I dislike this short acceleration lane, the angle of crash is actually quite friendly. That's for that area. The other one, thinking about some other crash types like run-off road crashes and the severity of those. So the use of slip-based poles, that's a slip-based pole there. It looks pretty good. Looks a touch low, but that's okay. Pretty good. So use of slip-based poles is a severity reducing factor. The distance, so this sort of clear zone or distance from hazards is actually a likelihood factor. People often want to put that as a severity reducing factor, but we know that vehicles go beyond these cleared areas, still run into the trees, and the severity is pretty much the same. I mean, you get tiny washes off in speed as vehicles leave the road, but there are still ones of high severity. So we say that the likelihood is reduced because if a vehicle comes around this curve, leaves the road, they've got less chance of crashing because they've got some cleared area where they can recover and come back on the road. But if they do, severity is still up quite high. So, you're seeing that there's quite a number of factors, and we're just sort of very quickly listing a few. Sorry, I'm just having a look at this poll. I know it's a flip-based poll. What is this thing? It's culvert, is it?
Stormwater culvert, yeah.
Okay, so it looks a bit that I would have that influencing my severity of crashes as sort of, if a vehicle is to leave the road. And remember in the first module, I said that run-off road around intersections is actually increased. Where did it go? Oh, there it is. Is it? Yep. No, that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
Run-off road at intersections actually increases due to the turbulence. So vehicles, propped to turn right, and then they've been waiting, and then people behind them are beeping, and they've gone, I'm going to take this gap, and they they see their gap on this side and they come out, and a vehicle coming up here has to avoid. And so we do have a bit of a sort of nasty hazard fairly close to the edge there. And the severity of that crash will be up due to the nature of it. So likelihood of runoff road is going to increase around here, and severity because of that goes up. So, okay, so you've nicely come up with the idea of a roundabout. Now, you are absolutely spot on there in saying that a roundabout has less conflict points. So we could do a conflict point analysis here and we'd discover less conflict points if we used a roundabout. Interestingly, though, the Austroad Safe System Assessment Framework will talk about roundabouts as just influencing the severity of crashes. And they kind of attribute it to rear end crashes go up at roundabouts, and you get, depending if it's 2 lanes, you get some merge lane change crashes that appear. They're all very low severity, but probably, because of that, they'll just attribute it as a severity reducing factor, but it is considered a primary safe system treatment. It's a really wonderful one for passenger vehicles, which are the main sort of risk there. Having a think about how those commuter cyclists would get through there would be important. We're going to talk a bit about that today. But you've got a nice bit of land space. The terrain looks fairly decent. And yeah, I think a roundabout might be something certainly to look at there. Anything else to add there, Michael?
Not from me. Thank you.
Well, that was excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And certainly very worthy of your prize for that. And a good example there of for us to talk through some of those factors: the exposure, the likelihood, and the severity. Okay. Now we're just gonna pop you away there. I'm just gonna do that. Thank you again, Michael. I can, if anybody else wants to talk through their intersection, we can do that now. We do have time, or I can jump into a bit of content. So I'll pause and see if anybody else wants to put their hand up. Okay, well, I'll get into a little bit of content. I will talk a little bit about some of the common. Oh, Andy's popped his hand up. Beautiful. Okay, Andy, hopefully, hello, how are you?
Yeah, good, Ken. Thanks very much. Like I'm happy to go whichever way you want, if you want to jump into some content, but if you were just, like if you were looking for a volunteer, I just did that.
I definitely am. I like talking through these real live ones that people have looked at, some real world stuff. So remind me where your intersection was.
It's down in Tasmania, in Launceston. So I think there would have been a link there somewhere,
yep.
But you probably haven't necessarily got that. But
Kathy has got it.
Forest Road. Yeah, yep.
Oh, we're there. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Thank you, Kathy. Step ahead again. Okay. This is the one. Is this the one?
I can't see your screen at the moment, mate.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, sorry. Got to hit the actual share button.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Beautiful Tasmania. I enjoy just street viewing myself into different places. Actually, there's that game. Sorry, I'm well off topic now. There's a game where they randomly drop you somewhere in the world street view, and they've removed all the labels, and you've got to work out where you are. It's a very fun game.
Yeah, that's cool.
I can't remember what it's called, but somebody typed that into the chat. I'm sure somebody's played it. It's very popular. Okay, let's have a look back to safe system assessments. Okay, what do we got here? Talk us through the intersection first, and then we'll talk about exposure, likelihood, and severity.
Yeah, okay. So this dual lane sort of arrangement is just leading out of town or into town, whichever way you're going. It's very high volume for our part of the the world. Yeah, the city's only about half a K behind us, and yeah, you're heading to sort of a very populated growth area along further along this carriageway. So it gets, in peak hour, it's very heavily used, and even traffic could even back up on the going into town in the morning. So, and people leaving work in the afternoon, evening, love to race along this section of highway in the direction we're facing at the moment, to sort of get ahead of the dawdlers, I suppose, and anyone who wants to sort of try and negotiate that intersection coming out of sort of the more residential area up on the hillside has to negotiate all those lanes of traffic with some bit of a poor sight distance for the people coming out of that sort of side road. Doesn't look too bad, but when you're propped there, yeah, there's a little bit of a crest that sort of gives you a bit of a false reading of the distance. You can't quite get to that other side there, I'm afraid. you can't.
Yeah,
You can only.
I'm trying to get right there.
Yeah, you can't get there. You can't get there. I just happen to know it's not too far from where I live that is an issue. But yeah, and then what people do tend to do is perhaps race across the first couple of lanes and prop themselves in that sort of medium space, hoping that they can find the next gap, which is a bit awkward as well. Yeah, I mean, there are cyclists and such, which I didn't mention, but they do use the road a bit. But the other thing is that you've got a residential area up on the hillside, and then you've got a walking trail on the opposite side of the road there, which you can sort of see a walking bridge just there, leading them around to the river's edge and through the sort of approach, the nature area there. And but there's no pedestrian access across the carriage or highway whatsoever. And not that I think a lot of people will do it, but I think if because you wouldn't risk it basically. Yeah, but that's certainly a consideration that there's a lack of facilities. Yeah, generally it's not a great location as far as the interaction between local residential and the main highways. So 70 k's an hour, so it's not huge high speed stuff, but it's certainly people, as I say, tend to race along there at times and increase their speed.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting one. Yeah, that's right. I did remember having a look at this. So, okay, let's talk through exposure factors first. What are your sort of?
Yeah, we've got 28,000 vehicles travelling on this highway a day, which is obviously fairly significant, or at least for our way, around our way, and then about 2,000 potentially off that side road. So yeah, there's certainly a major indifference in the numbers. So yeah.
Yep. So that's right. Yeah, and you've done exactly right there to hit the numbers as the exposure. I'm just having a sort of larger land use look at how it all operates, and it's okay. So the exposure is really high exposure because of the number of vehicles through there and coming out. You talked a little bit about exposure of pedestrians, and there might be some, but likely to be fairly low, but still some, maybe some cyclists, but still maybe low.
Yep.
And
the more of the weekend cyclists, but it's definitely more the vehicles that we're trying to manage, I think, in this area.
Yep. Okay. And motorcyclists probably a sort of usual 1.5% to 2% of vehicles, I would imagine. Nothing sort of drawing large numbers of motorcyclists to use this heading out any particular way. Good. Okay, let's go to likelihood of crash now. You already mentioned sight distance challenges. That's very much a likelihood. What else have you got?
Yeah, I said the speeding vehicles in the PM period, particularly. Trying to find that gap, especially with the sight distance issues, and the likelihood of the lack of pedestrian facilities. Basically, was something I put in the likelihood. It could cause issues. So they were my 3 for that one.
Yeah, good. Okay, so they're good. They're a good 3, and then there's plenty more that could. And when you do a full select system assessment, you've got to be listing lots and lots of them, and there are lots there. If we jump back down here, again, we can talk about think about different crash types. So you've got lots of hazards for runoff road close to running lanes. You've got all your power poles, and you've got poles sort of everywhere, which is going to increase the likelihood of a runoff road crash. There's plenty to hit if you leave your lane. We'll talk about the rigidness of those or lack of frangibility as a severity factor. The fact that you have to cross so many lanes here is a likelihood factor as well in order to do that right turnout.
Yep.
Now, the number of lanes is obviously going to influence, or is there because of the exposure, because of the number of vehicles. But the fact that you've got to cross all of these is a likelihood increaser. Lighting will decrease. Surface looks pretty good decrease. If you're going to have these dynamic visual obstruction challenges, I don't know if that bus is turning or is it just...
Yeah, it would be probably going up the hill, yep.
Yeah, so that's going to be a sort of classic where the bus is coming up here to turn, and there'd potentially be a car masked behind it. So somebody's been waiting for their gap and they go, oh, beauty, the bus is turning, and they'll come out here and that other vehicle comes up here. So dynamic visual obstruction, that's a likelihood factor. So, we're thinking about a variety of those. Interesting sort of continuation of the right turn lane here. What is that, a half?
I think it's like a wide shoulder slash, it's a very old infrastructure. Nothing's changed in this area for many, many years. So like you say, it's probably half a merge lane, half a wide shoulder. It's just very inadequate, basically. So it doesn't give you any confidence. Put it that way. It's not there for you. No. If anything, you tend to accelerate across the outbound lanes and prop yourself if you need to for a moment, just to pause, and then hoot over to the slower lane, if anything, rather than try and merge into what would potentially be the faster.
Yeah, and I imagine you're going to have again issues with vehicles coming in here to turn right, and people are propped here, and you can't see.
Blocks everyone's view. Like this, there's not enough space dedicated to the manoeuvres for sure. Yeah, but like you say, on the severity side of things, it is at 70 k's, so it could be reduced. There's those power poles very close to the carriageway, and then there's a culvert not too far away, which is unprotected. Okay.
Well, you're spot on there. So the speed is going to be a big influencer, and certainly for right angle type crashes, 70k well above our tolerable thresholds. We've got power poles, and the rigidness of them is the severity factor. So, fixed hazards is all over the place. As you mentioned, a culvert and probably little, bits and pieces to drop into there. So these are sort of severity factors. One I was also just, looking at as you're talking about it, sort of this, there's a continuation up there of the pedestrian sort of sidewalk. I sort of lost it for a second. Yeah, but pedestrians crossing there, that's more a likelihood factor, and the speed vehicles will come through. And as you mentioned, no facilities, which is likelihood, but the severity is the speed of vehicles there. So you're seeing severity really influenced by that speed, rigidity, rigidity of objects that will strike when you leave the road, vulnerability of road users, angles of crashes. So this is, the right angle is the one we're particularly focused on. The one coming out of here will be a little bit better. You can see the tyre marks, which gives you an indication of the angle. In fact, across that line is pretty much showing you some of the angle the crashes would happen at. But still at 70k is probably above what would be tolerable. Maybe 60 is sort of within the tolerable range. You want less than that on this side. Ideally, we don't want, you know, the likelihood of that at all. So what did you come up with, Andy? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, traffic signals, in this location to obviously control the ability for the vehicles to get out of the residential side street there, and also that would provide a facility for pedestrians who do want to access that walking area across the other side of the road. Also incorporated to sort of manage the sight distance issue is bringing down the speeds, 60 k's an hour potentially, and then a raised platform on the approach on the signals as well to sort of mitigate some of that speed. They were my sort of main thoughts to manage.
Great. And so the signals would be influencing the likelihood of crash for vehicles and pedestrians, and some of the and then the lowering of the speed limit and the race safety platform influencing the severity. And that's beautiful, because we are thinking about both there. I mean, in a very sort of, you know, traditional sense, it would just be a standard signalization, which would certainly improve things significantly. There's no doubt about that. But we would be left with that residual. And you mentioned some people like to, you know, speed along here a bit, turn along here a bit. And there would be issues at high speeds with bad angles. And that would be the sort of the residual that we want to work and try to reduce. So the raised platform would significantly reduce that, as the speed reduction would. So I think a really good option there. Well done. Thanks, Andy.
Cheers. No worries.
And lovely to visit Tassie. I'm just thinking also that raised platform and sometimes makes a nice gateway to sort of indicate you are really entering the more populated part of Launceston there. Maybe a little further out than I might have done that, but in general, you know, you can get some nice advantages of having the gateway as an entry, or a roundabout as a gateway entry into a township, ticking off many sort of boxes.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Like in this situation, there's a couple other signalised intersections further north already. I'm just wondering whether or not, you know, ideally in this situation, you probably almost apply that sort of same treatment for the raised platform that the existing signalised intersections, just to sort of, as you say, perhaps just to reinforce that whole approach to the sort of more urban area, built up sort of thing. Yeah.
No, I think you're right. And there is a bit of a reluctance in some jurisdictions to jump into the idea of a raised safety platform at signalised intersections. I think Tassie's quite there yet, and it'd be interesting to see that on some of these routes. But there's certainly examples around Australia where it has worked well. Good. Thank you, Andy.
Cheers.
Well played. I'm going to just drop you off there and stop sharing that. Now, Kathy, is there anything else I need to deal with before I jump into a few slides, or anything you want to say?
No, you're good at the moment, Ken. No questions. So if anyone does have any questions, please don't hesitate to type them into the chat as we go. But other than that, you're good to carry on, Ken.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thanks again to Michael and Andy there for sharing some of that. I think it's there were some really good examples there, nice thinking. And what I found with people's assignments was that there was great intersection analysis, and gave me good confidence. We do have a group who have got some really good ability to analyze intersections, and pretty good at categorizing things. So I was really happy with how most people looked at that and managed to categorize exposure, likelihood, and severity pretty well. The one, I suppose, that did trip a few people up, and it's completely understandable, was that the exposure. People were a little bit confused on exposure. A few people were. And so I thought I'd remind you again about the exposure. So exposure is the number of vehicles. It's going to be much easier when we start to quantify exposure in the Safe System Assessment Framework, because it's really just links back to how many vehicles, how many pedestrians, how many cyclists are going through the intersection or exposed on that length of road. But the example I gave, of some treatments that really influence exposure, completely closing off a road, removing all the conflict points is an exposure factor. Or that full separation and completely separating a road user, then the cyclists are not exposed to vehicle crashes, or the pedestrians are not exposed to vehicle crashes. So they're the exposure factors. So really, a number of people wanted to put things like traffic signals as an exposure influencer, but they don't actually influence exposure under the Safe System Assessment Framework. Another tricky one, and it is quite tricky, is the crossing distance. So if you've got a very wide road to cross as a pedestrian, you are exposed to crashes for a longer period, but under a safe system assessment, we will put that to likelihood. The reason we do that is we're wanting to quarantine the quantification of exposure to the number of pedestrians, and then how long they're out there, it gives more chance that they're going to crash. And obviously, of course, the facilities that they've got, whether it's a signalized crossing or they've got a refuge island or something that it's going to lessen the likelihood. And the severity will just be the speed of the vehicles predominantly, and maybe, if you have a particularly high proportion of older people crossing or something like that. So that's a little tricky one, I suppose, sometimes to get your head around. There are some definitions which we haven't got to in the Safe System Assessment Framework, which I really will delve into next session, but I wanted you to sort of get an understanding of the principles first. Exposure refers to which road users, in what numbers are using the road and thus exposed to potential crash. So we're talking about AABT, number of motorcyclists, cyclists, and pedestrians. Now, there are a series of things in sort of definitions around what is exposure, what is likelihood, what is severity, how do we account for these things. The Austroad Safe System Assessment Framework does a pretty good job of covering a lot of it. The different jurisdictions that have their supplements or their guidance does a really good job. But we sort of identified a series of gaps and put out some interim clarification after working with the Department of Transport in Victoria, just to clarify a few things. So we do have all these fact sheets on particular safe system assessment scoring. We haven't got to actually talking about scoring in detail yet, but I just wanted to flag that we have those there. And things like bike lanes, and or bike facilities, when are they exposure, when are they likelihood, and when are they severity? Well, it can be a bit complex to try to work out where you're accounting for your different risks. We'll get to that, but I do want to flag you've got those. They are in Moodle, so you'll be able to refer to these as you're going, when you're scratching your head and going, I wonder if that's exposure or likelihood, and the like. Okay, so this module, we're talking about vulnerable road users. We're talking about pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists. But the first thing we want to do is start thinking about movement and place, or link and place, or the One Network framework. depending on where you're sort of from. And then how do we integrate that and link that to safe system thinking? Now, to undertake a safe system assessment, you don't need to be a movement and place expert. You're going to need to sort of have a vague idea of what the idea of movement and place is and categorization of our network and the like. But you don't need to be, have a huge amount of expertise in it. But you'll see soon how they make an important link together. We're going to look at characteristics of vulnerable road users that align highly with safe system principles, pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists. And we're going to categorize risk factors for those, of course, into exposure, likelihood, and severity as you're all becoming experts on categorizing things. But we'll continue to do that as we put different treatments up and we talk about treatments. Don't forget to count your wallies, of course. So movement and place. Now there'll be some people in this group that are real experts in movement and place, and that's excellent. I'm going to just go at a very, very high level, conceptual level on the idea of movement and place as a strategic planning framework. And I'm going to use this old Sydney planning framework diagram. There's lots of different diagrams and way people are presenting it and talking about movement and place and the like. For simplicity, I like this one. And we do have a safe system snippet on this. If you're following along with the PDFs, if you download it out of Moodle, you'll be able to click on that and get a little bit more info in that linking. But movement on the y-axis and this concept of place on the x-axis. And place means, an area for trade, for people congregating, meeting, interacting, this community definition of place. And what we're saying is that roads and streets can provide both functions, and they provide both functions in varying ways. And so we have right out here motorways, which is providing solely a movement function. Now, it's important to remember, though, that movement is not about movement of cars, right? It's about movement of people and goods in whatever mode it is. So we could equally, instead of motorway, we could have like cycling superhighway there. So, just a cycleway moving people. Just happens they're on bikes. So don't get caught up into that trap of thinking that movement is about cars. It's about people and goods. So we've got movement, and that a motorway or a dedicated cycleway is not providing that place value, right? We don't want people congregating there, socializing, trading, interacting, and all of that. No, it's about moving the people and the goods through there. Right down the other end, where it's just place value and either has very little or no movement function, we're talking about your malls, your areas where it's all about that congregating, socializing, catching up, having a coffee, buying, and all of that. And you can see there the categorizations where we're seeing areas down in you're going to go up a little bit, but we're still in these, in this framework, they call places for people. Local streets is where they're saying it's fairly low place value and low movement function in there. We've got movement corridors, which can be your sort of major arterials and the like, and areas like that. And then these vibrant streets in this framework, high place and high movement. Now, why in a safe system assessment would we care? Because what we're doing is, we're analyzing risk essentially. So why would we care what a strategic planning framework is? It's movement and place categorization. Well, it's not about us assessing and quantifying that we care about this. It's about us making meaningful recommendations or suggestions to improve the project's alignment with safe system principles, which we do in a safe system assessment. And the key there is to make them meaningful, because we can achieve really high safe system alignment in this category, and in this category, and this category, and all of these categories, but they're going to be different. They're going to be different approaches, because you are going to be trying to maintain, I suppose, decent speed of cyclists or cars through these high movement corridors. Place that we're not going to be trying to do that, are we? We're certainly not. There's no need for that, because it's not a movement corridor. And it will probably erode some of the place value if we are moving vehicles through there at speeds. So you can immediately see there that we can influence safe system alignment, but it is going to impact potentially on how the road or street is categorized. But let's just play this out a little bit with some scenarios. So if we talk about the place for people categorization first, okay? And this is where we're saying high place value, pretty low, if low-ish movement function. And what I want to do is a little exercise. I'm just going to check. We'll do this exercise, and we'll have a. We'll do this exercise. I'll go through another one. Our next exercise, we'll have our stretch break and the like. But what we've got here is an artistic impression of a street, okay? And what I'm saying now is that we've categorized this area as place for people, or we've got an aspiration to make it place for people, high place value, not so worried about the movement function. That's not its major purpose. For moving people and goods through there isn't that important. And what I want you to do is tell me some ways that you could change this road environment to enhance, to really build up its place for people status. Okay. And what I'm going to ask you to do is write that into the chat, your idea, whatever it is, ideas. But I want you to also tell me whether that's influencing exposure, likelihood, or severity. So I don't know, if you said remove the lighting, which, for example, I'm saying something weird just because I don't want to influence anybody. Remove the lighting, and then you just put in brackets L after that. That's going to influence likelihood. So have a think about that. But remember to do this with squarely in your mind. This is in place for people territory. So the changes I'll make want to enhance that place for people. So looking to improve safe system alignment and by influencing exposure, likelihood, and or severity, and enhance that. So I'll give you a good few minutes to have a ponder and write a few ideas in there. And I might give you some prizes potentially.
I think everyone's getting the hang of it there, Ken.
That's good. Well, we'll give them another second. Yes, I'm seeing some good stuff coming in there. We'll give them another minute or two. Okay. Well, I'm seeing some very good stuff in there, very good thinking, and really impressed with the categorization as well there. So well done, and it's good to keep practicing that. Okay, so we've seen Sean's put in their street diet or road diet, and put that as an exposure factor, and that's it's as long as it influences the number of vehicles going through there, then we're happy with it influencing exposure. It'll also no doubt improve other factors, likelihood and severity, but it's a good idea. So that diet is to narrow it down, remove some of the lanes, allocate lanes to some other things, and anybody who's interested can Google road diet or street diet, and they'll get a good explanation of that. Restrict vehicle movements to one direction, to unidirection there. And I'm really impressed there, Michael, that you put that as likelihood, because it is a likelihood factor, unless we are specifically sort of provided traffic modeling or information that it will change the number of vehicles. So people sort of are tempted to jump to exposure on that because you may alter conflict points and the like, but we're still left with those conflict points and possibly the same number of vehicles just all going in the one direction because another route's gone one direction the other way. And so that's a good point. Irene's come in there with banned vehicles. I'm going to give a prize there to Irene on that one, because that's I always like that as the first bit of thinking around anything sitting in those categories of high place value, low movement value, is just why are vehicles going through there at all? Can it be blocked off? Can it be fully pedestrianized? And that will, eliminate exposure to vehicle crashes at least. And it's a wonderful starting point. As soon as we've identified low movement priority in the movement in place framework, that's a really great question to immediately start to dig into. Some great ideas there. Reducing carriageway width as a likelihood, correct, tick, great idea. And these ones are when you identify, well, we can't close it because they still has some movement requirements. So how do we do the best out of this? Convert it to a shared zone with a 10 km/h speed limit, severity and probably likelihood as well. Great one from Benjamin there. One lane, I'm seeing Andy got in there on the road closure just a little bit after Irene, no. And then some humps and platforms to slow any vehicles we have through there to reduce the severity of crashes. I'm just sort of scanning through now to see any that stand out as different to talk to. You have some ideas around sort of pavement textures and surface changes and treatments there. So that's really all trying to get the speeds of any vehicles through there down to reduce the likelihood and severity of any, or likelihood of crashes, and also the severity of any that do occur. Pedestrian crossing points, and we see that on a few. Now, this is where you've really moved significantly up the movement of vehicles through the area categorization. I mean, places where people, I tend to think, usually wouldn't have dedicated crossing points, because the idea of a crossing point immediately says that this is a movement corridor for vehicles, right? And pedestrians, you go to that point and you're allowed to cross at that point and you wait, or okay, you might have priority across that, but it's still very much saying that, hey, this is a road for cars, right? And the place part of that is the new thinking and the challenging of that traditional view of a road that it is to move cars through as quickly as possible in all situations. So the nature of a dedicated crossing point has pushed things up, and actually will start to degrade a little bit the place. Now, so the shared zones where the whole area is pedestrianized and those sort of things are preference, but as your movement requirements of vehicles through the area goes up, yes, you are going to find yourself in a position where that's appropriate. So worth looking at. Really good. Well done, everybody. Very impressed there. Let's have a look at a sort of artistic impression of it. And, you know, always take artistic impressions with a grain of salt, but you can see there, very low speed environment, wide areas for pedestrians and cyclists, very low speed environments. Now, this artistic impression does have a crossing point, which I don't like that. So I would, you know, really just shared zone this whole area, and that, you know, provides this wonderful, highly sort of place value area, lots of socializing, trading and interacting going on. If a vehicle needs to go through there, well, we don't want them, and there's no need for them going through fast, and we don't want lots of them going through. It's not, movement through here is not a priority, and it's very, you know, it's going to have very high alignment with safe system principles, and it also really builds up our whole movement and place categorization. As you raise up through that, as you as a group rightly identified, that's when you start creating these particular facilities and crossing points, because the movement characteristics of vehicles and bikes and things through there at speed is going more and more. You're still maintaining and, you know, holding on to as much place value as you can, and trying to provide that movement function as well. Okay, local streets are an interesting one, and we generally call local streets as having low place value. Now, don't tell the residents we individual residents we've defined their area as low place value, because I don't like that. But it's that whole of community place that we're thinking about place value. But low place, low movement, yes, certainly they need to access their roads, and the garbage truck needs to get in and those sorts of things. But it's not about moving vehicles and people and goods and cyclists through there as fast as possible. They need, you know, reasonable ability to access, and that's pretty much what we're aiming at. So in that, in a sort of similar way, but just it's, you know, stepping up again, we can see there you're still providing facilities to significantly lower speeds through areas, because the movement is not as critical, movement of people and goods through there. It's about access, and the safe system with vulnerable road users means we really got to keep speeds down through these areas. It's obviously going to change a little bit as you have your major collectors through an area that might serve more of a movement function, and you'll alter those, but generally sort of trying to provide that. Let's go to vibrant streets, and this is the category where we're going to take a little bit of a stretch break as well, and I'm going to give you a similar exercise. But these become quite challenging, because we're still sitting out here with high place value requirements, but we're now up with high movement of people and goods. Remember, through this area is, you know, we want to be able to move them at reasonable speed through these areas. So let's have a look at this one. And this is an area that's been defined as that vibrant streets category. High place value is what we're aspiring to. High movement function for people and goods through this area as well. So what we're currently seeing there is lots of traffic lanes. We've got lots of pedestrians, we've got cyclists. There is like a pedestrian overpass. We've got some fencing in the middle there and the like. Let's do the same exercise as we did for that first one, of you thinking about what could be altered here in this environment, acknowledging that it has, we're aiming to alter it and to increase and make it high place value and high movement in that vibrant streets category. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes now. So you might want to spend a couple of minutes jotting a few ideas in. and a couple of minutes having a stretch, filling your water up, and we'll get back to it in 5 minutes. Okay. So starting to see some really good ideas popping in here, and again, nice, generally nice categorization, exposure, likelihood, and severity of some of the ideas here. Okay, so we are now trying to do a very challenging thing, which is move people and goods through an area, but also keep at decent pace, and also retain high place value. And it is a challenging thing to do. Some ideas that I'm seeing coming in, some people talking about signalizing, signalizing crossing points and signalizing parts of it. And inevitably that is something that we get to in these sorts of areas, because you are still trying to move people and goods through there. And you've got to provide that facility to cross, and it can be challenging. So signals do sort of come out in this quite often. Now, they will influence the likelihood of crashes. Remember, the likelihood for signals. Unless we do other things to it, it's a likelihood factor. Reconfiguring lanes is going to be a good one as well, and thinking about some dedicated bike facilities through there, because remember, moving the bikes through there is still moving people through there. And so bike facilities and other lanes. The speed at this 70 km/h, which has been sort of put down here, is still going to be very challenging to keep our safe system alignment. Okay, it might help a little bit on the movement of some of the vehicles through there, but remember, we're trying to move as many people as we can through there, and keep a place value. So finding that balance, and this swings a bit far into the car direction, and reducing some of the place value. So I do agree with that sort of speed reduction when you're in this category is going to be very important, just due to the fact that it's trying to have that place value to it, which will involve pedestrians and cyclists and others, vulnerable road users in the area. And the idea of, I suppose, restricting pedestrian crossing, actually the grades are place value there. So again, because of that high place value, we are still probably going to want people to have the ability to permeate through this area and cross at grade. In fact, the idea of a separated pedestrian overpass, as you sort of see there, that actually goes slightly against any place value of the area. So they're more traditionally utilized in that movement corridor, solely movement corridor, because you're really saying, you know, movement along here is absolutely, you know, it. And when you're trying to balance movement and place, it doesn't quite go that way. So here's, I suppose, an artistic impression. I'll get rid of some of my drawings on that. Artistic impression, and it's a very sort of different road environment, isn't it? It's still very wide, but you can see the movement corridor the movement functions are provided through the cycle ways, the bus ways, the vehicle ones as well, and really, I suppose, highlighting that, you know, movement of people and goods rather than just movement of cars. And certainly for cars only, it's not, you know, there's not as much movement space, and they're going to be going a little bit slower, but still getting through there. But really, the place value is significantly higher, and there's, you know, good places to cross, congregate, mingle, have a coffee, and the like. So, yeah, providing these sort of visions can help us, but also then when we're trying to create these safe system recommendations or highly aligned recommendations, thinking about what the categorization is certainly helps. And we're seeing, different cycling facilities being added to different areas. I'll talk a little bit more about some of this shortly. All in, providing that movement, but trying to enhance place as well. And when we're doing the safe system assessment, it can be a little bit challenging for us to decide, is that cycle facility there influencing exposure, likelihood, or severity of crashes involving vehicles and people who ride bikes? Now, I would say in this scenario, it's a likelihood influencer. You may be tempted to say exposure because, hey, they're not exposed to crashes anymore. They're not there, but there easily a vehicle could enter this area. They were distracted on their phone or whatever it is, because there's a bit of curbing protecting. And then there's also all the turning in and out and crossing over this that exposes them. So they're less likely to be involved in a crash there. The exposure is probably the same, unless we have not significant increase in numbers of cyclists, which will then call an increase in exposure for cyclists, but the likelihood will be down. The severity will be about the speed of vehicles. Okay, movement corridors. Movement corridors are that about the movement of people and goods through there, and really acknowledging that we're not trying to retain place value. We don't want people to be there congregating, trading, meeting, having a coffee, catching up, or whatever it is. So we do see the major arterials fitting into this category, and you can do things to restrict people from crossing, restrict people from mingling there. It could be, as I said before, you've got completely dedicated cycle facilities and the like. But we do really still want to try to bring the conflict points and the areas of conflict down to within tolerable levels. And that's where we see our raised intersections, where the major arterials cross like this, slowing vehicles at that point. Not down to super low speeds, but down within tolerable levels for the major crash types. Well, thank you for the input there. You've done really well. I'm confident you're all getting the hang of that. So I can keep sort of moving on and talking a little bit about cyclists and pedestrians, and then I'll jump in and talk about another vulnerable road user, motorcyclists. Now, be aware we're not going to go into any detail at all in these. There's some high-level principles and thinking. What you're going to have to do in your safe system assessments is consider the needs of these road users with everything that you have as existing knowledge, and just relate it back to some of those forces that these road users can handle. And cyclists and pedestrians, we know they are our most vulnerable road users. We're seeing severe injury or at 10% risk around that 20, and almost certain death around the 50, and generally around the 30 km/h is where we sort of place that threshold. The young and the old even more vulnerable. Ideally, we're managing speeds to around the 20 where possible, which would significantly reduce the serious injury risk as well, or looking to separate. Sorry, slides going again. And separating is starting to be quite popular for cyclists in these Copenhagen-style lanes. And yeah, I don't need to talk too much more about it. As I said, there's a fact sheet that actually talks about when you would categorize something like this as an alteration to exposure, or likelihood, or, well, severity would really need to have some sort of speed reduction of vehicles. Now, we talked about roundabouts in our second module in a bit of detail, and why they're so wonderful, I suppose, for passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle crashes and used in these higher speed environments, rural areas. But we do have some challenges with roundabouts and cyclists in particular. Pedestrians avoid roundabouts because of some of the challenges of crossing. the research doesn't particularly indicate that pedestrians are at more risk, but I think that that's also heavily influenced on the fact that they don't cross there. So we've got an actual active transport issue. People aren't crossing at roundabouts, and in fact, it can be an inhibitor to actually people deciding to walk places and the like. Especially old people trying to cross roundabouts is a somewhat near impossibility, or a 2-lane roundabout, or a roundabout with 5 legs and 2 lanes is just, you're never going to get older people crossing at those locations. But the idea here, and this is the Moray Street roundabout, is to try to create facilities that cater for everybody, improve safety for everybody, but still retain some nice characteristics of the roundabout in movement. And we see there the sort of separated facility for cyclists, pedestrian facility, raised platforms, retaining the roundabout. So if the bike rider is coming up here and they want to turn right, they sort of go around like their own outer roundabout. It's very just Dutch roundabout design 101, really, this sort of stuff, but it's still a bit new for us in Australia. But what we see when we have this, and we have that lowering of speed here and the like, we're ticking off both likelihood and severity of crash for pretty much all road users here. And there's a picture of it actually built. So that one was a cartoon image of it, but performing really well. And some of you have done our cycling infrastructure course and got to ride around it, at least in 3D vision from your desk, and some that have actually come on a cycling course where we're, before COVID, when we were allowed to actually ride around the city and look at stuff. We went to this one. But, the same concept can work for larger roundabouts. It becomes more and more challenging. But the idea of separating and getting the cyclists out of the circulating carriageway is generally seen as the one that significantly reduces the likelihood of crashes, and can provide cyclist priority across, and then maybe areas without priority. So in these scenarios, we're going to see lower likelihood of crash here because it's a nicely designed spot, prop, look, good vision of what's coming, set back nicely. Severity might be down a little bit from having no roundabout, because vehicles are going to come in here at a much slower speed, but the severity will still be there. So not quite as good as we'd like. Of course, grade separating and going under these, which certainly the Dutch would say absolutely always is what you have to do. That's our sort of ultimate, which really eliminates the exposure to crashes. This is a little adaptation of a Dutch diagram, just sort of showing at a general level the 0 to around the 30km/h mark. We're sort of able to share lanes, and then you've got to start physical separation, be that using parking facilities or curbing or the like, to say bikes and cars. And then when you're up in above that 70 to 100, absolutely dedicated, fully separated away facility is required. That's going to give us high alignment with safe system principles in general here. Pedestrians. So, Kathy, any questions popping in at this stage? I see. Okay, I think.
Just about the mammal terminology you're using, Ken.
Did I say mammal? I just slip it into my vocabulary without even noticing. Yes, middle-aged men in lycra, and I have to put my hand up as a mammal as well. I get out there occasionally.
It was on the drawing. Should we give Andy might get a prize for his expert attention to detail there.
Oh, right. Yep. Good. Okay, pedestrians. We generally have sort of a similar characteristic in terms of the vulnerability of a cyclist and a pedestrian, both unprotected. So, helmet helps out a little bit in that severity, but not not a huge amount, but it does help. But the idea that any points pedestrians are crossing in any numbers, we want to slow vehicle speeds. Now, this is a New Zealand picture, but the idea of a raised pedestrian crossing aligns so well with safe system principles. In fact, any area, this is my sort of personal opinion, when you have got enough pedestrians to warrant pedestrian priority across a road, you have to slow vehicles at that point to well within tolerable levels. And raised crossings are the most logical and most sort of sound and accepted way of doing this. So the raised crossing is going to influence the likelihood and the severity. If this was just a standard zebra crossing, standard pedestrian crossing without the raised part of it, we know that it does very little, if nothing, or sometimes makes things worse in a road safety perspective. Because we have the pedestrians having priority, okay, well, that's nice, but the vehicles are still going at speed and the pedestrians are less alert of what's coming, and you get these mistakes at high speed. So yeah, we really want to see these crossings raised up, or significant measures to reduce travel speed of vehicles on the approach to pedestrian crossing points. Have a look at we've got a snippet for that one as well. There's so many other advantages to raised crossing points as well, in the sense that highly equitable in terms of all road users and abilities of road users to cross, elevates the sight line of the crossing pedestrian, as we talked about, lower speed, increases the active transport modes, just wins all round. Wombat crossings, we call them, obviously.
Just a quick question there on colours. The previous one you had was red and white. I understand that was in New Zealand. Can you tell us a little bit about what colours perhaps we should be using here?
Yeah, okay, good spotting on or good thing to bring up. So New Zealand has tried using red. They've now stopped using red due to colour contrast challenges for some road users in seeing it and perceiving it. I know the city of Yarra has done some red crossings as well. Contrast is the key there. So what they're trying to do with the red is get even more reduction in likelihood, even more identification of the area, highlighting it and all that. And that's, that's fair enough. But generally, black, dark pavement with white zebra stripes is sufficient and does a pretty good job. I've not seen any evaluations to indicate that a coloured raised crossing performs any better than a one just like this. But I'm always open to people showing me evaluations and me changing my my comments on that. So if you know of something or you've evaluated it yourself or the like, I'd be very interested. Now, this picture I put up to tell a little bit of a story, a little bit of an analogy, and it's to say that we know how to create a safe system for pedestrians, and we've done it for quite a long time, and we know the theory of it. We just don't tend to afford that to the travelling public. So what we've got here is some works that were happening in Adelaide quite a while back, and this road was a 60 km/h speed limit at the time. It's not that anymore, but 60. And they needed to do works in the traffic island and there for a while. And so what they did was put in their South Australian construction site speed limit, which goes down to 25 km/h. They're the only jurisdiction that does it 25. Most people Most jurisdictions do a 40 km/h work zone, but they do a 25 as their sort of standard one. They put out these barriers out there, and the workers were in there doing their work, and they finished, and then the barriers got removed. The speed limit went back up to 60 km/h. And then we have about 3,000 pedestrians standing in this location, exactly where the workers were, and even crossing the road as well. So the thing is that, you know, for some reason, as soon as we're going, well, it's they're a worker, so then we must protect them, and we must think about ensuring the severity is down and minimizing the chance anybody struck. General public, no, we're not affording that same provision of safety to them. And this is my sort of usual elevator. If you need an elevator pitch for a safe system, or you need a explanation of it in a very quick time frame, say, do you know how we think about workplace health and safety and worker safety? Yeah, we want to afford that same level of safety and thinking to the traveling public. And you create a very, you know, if we were able to do that, we have a wonderfully safe system. I mean, and it sort of lands home with me fairly vividly in a few different things. I think this is a pretty good one to just say, well, we've got the same human structure, and, you know, we might say, oh, well, but the workers aren't concentrating on the road. I'll tell you now, a lot of the pedestrians aren't concentrating on the road either. They're looking at their phone, they're, you know, listening to music, distracted, intoxicated, you name it. But for some reason, it's okay for us to sort of push it. So that one's fairly obvious. And another one I find funny, and some of you might have worked in mine, like for mining companies or the like, but you're driving along the public road network to a massive mine site, for example, and you're driving along at 100 or 110 km/h, right? Then you enter the mine area, their sort of land, and you might still have another 20 kilometers of the road to go. It's the same road, it's the same road environment, but they drop you down to about 50 km/h, because they're like, there's no possible way we're letting people have that much risk on this road. So it's, again, it's as soon as you're in control of those people, it's unacceptable risk, but for the general public, it's not. Anyway, it's just interesting discrepancies. We are getting better, and we continue to find ways. And I suppose, you know, we are seeing areas like this now where we do have vulnerable road users in the area. We've got better protection, and thinking about areas like this. And if you do a safe system assessment of a public transport facility of any description, the likelihood of crashes is significantly up. And the reason for that is that people take all sorts of risks when their public transport is arriving. So trams, for example, you know, as the tram's arriving, the risk-taking behaviour just goes off the charts. If people running for the tram, or same train, bus, you name it. Some good studies on that. It's about double, you know, the risk of an area and a road for pedestrian trauma if there's public transport facilities around than not, with the same sort of volumes of pedestrians, if that makes sense. So you're trying to calibrate it for that volume. So yeah, just remember that higher likelihood of crashes, which you would be accounting for in your safe system assessment. But we do have great new treatments. We've talked a lot about raised intersections. They're going to provide benefits for everybody. Pedestrians are going to get some great benefit. Nice little one out of Tassie. Andy, you probably know the area. But I really do like the way they've done the bollards here. You know, when you raise an intersection, it's a bit of a detailed thing. You lose your curb definition there. So larger vehicles and even small vehicles can tend to start to track over your pedestrian waiting areas a bit more. So some nice bollards out there to delineate that and stop that is a nice way of doing things. That's the other side. Threshold treatments, more raised stuff is good, and speed limit reductions work. Here's just a nice little graphic showing when there was a default 60 km/h speed zone, and then it got changed to a default 50 for urban areas, and you can see the step change there over a year. So pretty impressive stuff. Okay, any questions for me, Kathy, before I jump into having a bit of a chat about motorcyclists, and then we might give people a bit of time to be able to finish off their quiz, and for those who have not yet submitted their assignment, who are a little bit behind, they'll have the opportunity to do that.
Thank you, Ken. We just had a comment come through about the ACTs replacing many of the red oxide concrete raised crossings with asphalt raised crossings at the moment. So, but that's all for now. So we can move on to motorcyclists.
Okay. And again, I'm not going to talk in much detail about motorcyclists. Sorry. Something on my screen. And now I've gone on my screen. Anyway, let's... some of you may be motorcyclists. Pop it in the chat if you are. It's always interesting to know how many motorcyclists we have. I like to think of the 5 S's of motorcycle safety, and we'll link them back to safe system principles. But sight, surface, signs, strike, and speed. So can motorcyclists be seen, and can the motorcyclist see what's coming up? Are we providing appropriate surfaces for the riders? Are there signs to warn, inform, guide, control? What are the strike hazards? So what will the motorcyclist hit, and how much energy will be transferred to the rider in that strike? And what are the speeds? What are the speeds that the riders are traveling, and what are the speeds other vehicles are striking riders? So 5 S's. And if we look at those in terms of likelihood and severity, the sight, surface, and signs are all likelihood factors. The strike is a severity factor. Speed is that magic thing because it influences the chance a crash will happen, because you've got more time to react and avoid. And if it does happen, the severity is lower. So there is another S, which I would use more in developing countries or middle-income countries, where they're, which is separation. But we're not quite there in Australia, really, at the idea of providing separated, dedicated motorcycle facilities. But we might get there. But that would be an exposure factor. Now, there's been some recent research into motorcyclist injury curves for different crash types, and you can see them there. I'll put them there. Now that's looking at the MAIS 3 plus fatal, which is MAIS is an injury severity scale, and 3 is the high end of that, the highest end of that, and F is obviously fatal. So these are very high-end severe injuries, but you can see they're slightly different to the curves. But what we know is that even a motorcyclist wearing the best protective gear, body armor and the like, is still quite far from able to withstand the forces of a passenger vehicle, an occupant in a passenger vehicle with seatbelt on. The crumple zones, the airbags and everything for the vehicle are just far superior than anything that the motorcyclist is protected with. So highly vulnerable to injury. So I just jumped through those S's quite quickly here. Sight being a likelihood factor, and we know that motorcyclists can be hidden. So sightline impediments can be, much smaller than they are for obviously passenger vehicles. So we need to think a little bit about that. When you do a safe system assessment, you have a specific view of motorcycles and their exposure, likelihood, and severity, and you will analyze them as crashes in their own right. You'll be thinking about these sorts of things. The surface, the motorcyclists are referred to as the canary in the coal mine when it comes to surface condition, because they're the first to be killed or seriously injured when things are bad or start to go bad. And it's because of a few things. First of all, too small contact patches on the surface. Riders lean when they're going around a curve, and thus we see that the sort of center of gravity is out there. So as they slide, they go down. It's fairly sort of common sense stuff, and you know it, but the surface plays a really important role for riders in the likelihood of crashes. And we've got to think about the different surfaces that are out there, and sometimes, you know, big steel plates are used, and obviously if they're wet and a bit slippery, it's going to quite increase the likelihood of crashes for riders. I say, well, they'll be able to see that, but it might be, you know, at night, or it could be a bit foggy, or they could be following behind a large vehicle, and you know, there's certainly increased likelihood of crash there. We've got signs. So we've got warning signs, guiding, informing signs. There's particular signs you can use to warn motorcyclists, because motorcyclists are very well attuned to signage, and it's actually quite a good likelihood reducer to be providing really good signage for motorcyclists. They are the road user that tends to benefit the most from good, correct, consistent signage and warning of any particular hazards. And this one's particularly effective, this sign, which is used now quite a bit around Australia for specific motorcycle hazards. So that's a hazard that's going to be more of an issue for a motorcyclist than any other road user. We go to strike. Now we're in this severity category for motorcyclists. And I'm going to play this little video, which is of the European crash test for motorcyclists into barriers, actually. And it's a 60 km/h motorcycle sliding 25-degree into a post. And so that's 60 km/h crash test dummy. And you can see that it fairly much destroys the crash test dummy. If we're able to put an underrun protection device on there, we redirect the energy, and you can see the rider keeps going, is dissipating energy along. It's still, you know, quite a serious event, but has been shown at that sort of 60 km/h to be within tolerable limits. And so we see the severity significantly reduced with the implementation of the underrun protection. Some people often call it rub rail. Rub rail's a particular one where there's lots of different products out there. Rub rail's the public domain underrun protection. And so that's for W-beam systems, flexible W-beams, or your Type B or G4 systems, and can provide a pretty good reduction in the severity of crashes with that particular aspect. And so that's good. It shows us we have some hope in the severity and management of energy for motorcycle crashes. The question that often comes up around this point is associated with wire rope safety barriers, and how do we go with those? And it's certainly an area that the motorcycle community has put forward as something they think is a major issue. The data, the research, the evidence does not support the fact that it is an issue. And I'll explain a little bit why, actually. I'm just going to see if I can get a blank screen or the drawer on here. Yeah, I'm going to use this drawer. Okay. So we can't add an underrun protection the same way to a wire rope safety barrier system because there's nothing available. Nobody's designed it and tested it, and there's nothing there. But the reason probably nobody's gone down that track is that the proportion of motorcycle crashes involving wire rope safety barrier systems is extremely small, extremely small. So if what we see is that about, let's see if I can remember the numbers on this. I was looking at it not that long ago. If you save 20% of the death and serious injury on our road network with motorcyclists, it's probably a little under that, but we'll get 20%. And if you say of that, about 20% is crashes of motorcyclists with barrier systems, of that, about 3% is crashes with wire rope barrier systems. So you can see we're down at a pretty low proportion of any of the trauma for motorcyclists. Now, why is that? Well, a few reasons. First of all, there probably is a lot more other barrier systems out there on the road network than wire rope safety barrier systems, but there's more and more wire rope going out there. But another one is that we would never use a wire rope safety barrier system on a popular motorcycle touring route. Why is that? Because they tend to look like this. And if you, this is looking from the top down. And for those who know a bit about wire rope barrier systems, if you have a road, you know, your road goes like that, and you put a wire rope barrier system in on the outside of a curve like that, for example, and these are all the posts. The way this barrier system works is you tension it up at each of the ends. Tension, 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 and it will just pop into the middle of the road. Your post will bend over and it'll pop into the middle of the road. So we can't do it. We have an absolute minimum curve radius for wire rope of 200. And so we don't use it on the Great Ocean Road, Waterfall Way, the Great Alpine Road, and whatever your local popular motorcycle touring routes are. Wire rope safety barrier systems are used generally on your big long straights, on the outside, sometimes in the middle as a motorcyclists don't fall asleep on the bike the way car drivers do, and these wire rope systems are generally there to protect road users after they've fallen asleep or drifted off the road like that on these big long straights up the Midland or on the Hume or the Pacific Highway or these sorts of things. Now, of course, there are some, situations where we do have sweeping bands or others and motorcyclists, and that sort of accounts for a little bit of that. But it's I suppose important to dispel this myth that the biggest road safety issue for motorcyclists is wire rope safety barriers. It's so ludicrous. It's such a minuscule proportion of the issue. It seems to get a large amount of the attention for one reason or another. Don't get me wrong, a motorcyclist hitting a wire rope safety barrier system is that we don't have good energy absorbing properties or retrofit devices. And that's something where some innovation could take place. But if the multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies that produce road safety barrier systems aren't investing in that and doing research and development on it, it's because it's not a market for it, because motorcyclists aren't hitting the barrier systems. So it sort of plays itself out. Anyway, probably enough on that. It is a pretty severe event when a motorcyclist hits a post. Speed. Now, we can influence speed through a whole lot of ways. Speed of riders through advisory speeds, regulatory speeds, through the infrastructure that is provided. So these are all good possible characteristics. And we know that speed influences both the likelihood and the severity. And yeah, I'll probably leave it at that. We do have one quiz, and then we're going to give you 10 minutes to do your actual quiz in Moodle and finish off your assignment. So let's pop that up there. You want me to do it, Kathy? No? There you go. There it is. True or false? If using a proper helmet and good safety gear, a motorcyclist can be considered as a passenger vehicle / car in safe system crash force tolerances. True or false or unintelligible question. There you go. Now, Kathy, as people pop that in, anything else from the administration management of the course?
Thanks, Ken. No, everyone's doing quite well. If you haven't got in your module 2 assignment, the one that we've been through today, do so, and Ken, you can have another go at marking those before the next session. In the next session, we will assign you your site. Actually, I might get everyone to have a sneak peek at that. Yes, I've got some time to do a sneak peek at that one.
Yep. Well, we'll end this poll now. And so, yes, I was leaning towards false as the answer on that one. Unintelligible questions, always a safe one with what I put out there often, but no, false. Like, yeah, it's a motorcyclist is still far more vulnerable, even with all the good gear, than a passenger vehicle occupant, as I said at one point in the session. So ended that, and we don't need to share the results. Most of you are on the false bandwagon there. But over to you, Kathy. You want to show people something in the Moodle?
Yes, in the Moodle. Thank you, Ken. So we do have a quiz. Just you're all getting very good at this one. So there's module 3 quiz, and what we have, if you don't mind having a little sneak peek into module 4, which is complete your safe system assessment. And I'll just show you what that looks like at the moment. So we have found you a site near the address that you've given us when you registered, and they're all in here. So you'll see people's names at the end of them. So if you don't mind jumping in there and having a quick look and making sure that that site is in fact actually near to where you live or work, and that you'll be able to get there and you haven't moved in the last 2 weeks or something like that, and you need something a bit closer to home or work, if you could email me and let me know. But you don't have to do anything with it right now, apart from just checking that yes, it is convenient to you, and then Ken will run through in the next module how all that works and what you need to do.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kathy. But yeah, don't start that, because you need more instructions, but just check the address is right. Okay, good. I don't think anybody's got any other questions or comments. David's a motorcyclist. Very good. Be safe out there. And yeah, do your quiz. Get in contact if you're struggling on that assignment or if you're confused about anything. Otherwise, we'll see you at the next session. Log in a bit early for a chance to win a prize.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Ken. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.